London, 1815. The only thing more tedious than a ballroom full of preening peacocks, Lady Delilah Everleigh thought, was the prospect of dancing with them. At 32, widowed these past 8 years, she had developed an expert ability to decline an invitation while maintaining the perfect veneer of politeness. "I fear I must save my energy, Lord Pembroke," she said with a practised smile. "My charitable pursuits have quite exhausted me this week." The gentleman nodded stiffly, disappointment evident in his countenance, before he retreated across the gleaming parquet floor of Lady Hartwell's ballroom. Delilah allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The man was the fifth who had approached her this evening, each wearing that familiar expression of calculated interest. She knew precisely what they saw, not a woman of intellect and determination, but the substantial fortune her late husband had left her, along with the charming townhouse in Mayfair and the country estate in Derbyshire that came with no entailment and no interfering relatives. Another conquest dispatched with military precision, came a warm, amused voice beside her. "One might think you enjoy crushing men's hopes, Delia." Her dear friend Lady Constance Harlowe slipped her arm through Delilah's, her intelligent eyes dancing with mischief. "You know very well I have no interest in conquest, Delilah replied. "I merely wish to be left in peace to manage my affairs and pursue my interests without a man presuming to take control of them." Affairs, interests, and a fortune that grows rather than diminishes. No wonder you're the prize of the season, yet again. "A prize implies someone will win me," Delilah said dryly. "I assure you, that is not the case." 8 years a widow had taught Delilah several immutable truths. First, that marriage, even to the kindest of men, as her husband Thomas had been, was fundamentally a surrender of self. Second, that society permitted widows freedoms unavailable to unmarried girls or wives, freedoms she had come to cherish beyond measure. And third, that no man truly wanted a woman for her mind, they wanted her fortune, her beauty, or the status she might provide them. She had learned these lessons at great cost. Thomas had been 30 years her senior, kind but controlling in the way of men who believe they know best. He had managed every aspect of her life, from the books she read to the friends she kept, all with benevolent tyranny. His death had been a shock, but the subsequent discovery of her own capabilities had been a revelation she refused to relinquish. "You must admit, Lord Pembroke has a magnificent estate," Constance whispered. "And Lord Willoughby is quite handsome, despite that unfortunate chin." "An estate requires management, and a handsome face requires admiration," Delilah replied. "Both sound exhausting." The orchestra struck up a lively country dance, and Delilah allowed her gaze to drift across the room. She had become adept at appearing engaged while maintaining a safe distance from actual engagement. Her eye swept past the familiar faces of the ton, noting new liaisons and scandals with detached amusement. Then her gaze caught on an unfamiliar figure standing near the entrance. Tall and broad-shouldered, the gentleman stood slightly apart from the crowd, his expression one of cool assessment rather than eager socializing. Something about his stillness amidst the swirling dancers captured her attention. "Who is that?" she asked Constance, nodding discreetly. Constance followed her gaze, then inhaled sharply. "Good heavens, that's the Duke of Zephyron. Zachary Xavier. He's been abroad for years, fighting on the continent, then diplomatic service in Vienna, I believe. Everyone thought he might not return to England at all." "A military man and a diplomat," Delilah mused. "How tediously accomplished." "There's nothing tedious about him," Constance replied with unusual seriousness. "His story is rather tragic. He was engaged before the war, but his fiancée married his cousin while he was fighting in Spain. Some say that's why he stayed away so long." "Another man disappointed in love," Delilah said dismissively. "How original." Yet even as she spoke, the Duke's eyes met hers across the room. The intensity of his gaze, appraising but not presumptuous, caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgment so subtle it might have been imagined. "Careful, Delia," Constance murmured. "Your disinterest appears to have attracted interest." "Nonsense," Delilah replied, though she found herself smoothing her dove-grey silk gown. "I'm sure he's merely surveying the room." But the flutter remained, an unwelcome reminder that beneath her carefully constructed independence beat a heart that had, perhaps, grown too accustomed to solitude. The following afternoon found Delilah in her study, reviewing the accounts from her Derbyshire estate. The spring planting had gone well, and her land steward reported that the new drainage system she had insisted upon, against his initial objections, was already proving beneficial. Another small victory for her judgment. Her butler, Simmons, appeared at the door with silver tray in hand. "A caller, my lady," he announced with the precise neutrality that had made him invaluable these 8 years. "The Duke of Zephyron." Delilah's quill paused over her ledger. "The Duke? I am not acquainted with him." He presents his card and the compliments of Lady Hartwell, who apparently suggested he call. Of course she did, Delilah thought with exasperation. Harriet Hartwell had been attempting to match her with suitable gentlemen for years, each attempt more transparent than the last. She considered refusing the visit, she often did, but curiosity overcame her practiced caution. "Show him to the drawing-room, Simmons." "I shall be there presently." After taking a moment to ensure her appearance was suitably dignified, she would not have him think she had made any special effort, Delilah made her way to the drawing-room. The Duke stood by the window, examining one of her prized orchids with apparent interest. "Your lordship," she said, entering the room with measured grace. "This is an unexpected honor." He turned, and Delilah was struck by the intelligent clarity of his gaze. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, like the sea before a storm, set in a face that spoke of both authority and thoughtfulness. He was not conventionally handsome, his features were too strong, his expression too serious, but there was something compelling about him that made conventional handsomeness seem rather trivial. "Lady Everleigh," he said, bowing. His voice was deep and measured. "I appreciate you receiving me without prior introduction. Lady Hartwell suggested I might call upon you regarding the East London Widows and Orphans Fund." This was unexpected. Most gentlemen invented charitable pretexts that were transparently false. The Duke appeared genuinely interested. "You have an interest in the fund, Your Grace?" she asked, gesturing for him to take a seat while she settled on her favorite chair. "I do," he replied simply. "Having seen the devastation of war firsthand, I find myself concerned with those left behind." "I understand you serve on the committee." "I founded it," Delilah corrected, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. "After my husband's passing, I discovered many widows lack the financial security I was fortunate to retain. The fund provides training and employment for widows, and education for their children." For the next half-hour, the Duke asked intelligent questions about the fund structure, its accomplishments, and its challenges. Not once did he attempt to flatter her or steer the conversation toward personal matters. It was refreshing and slightly disconcerting. "You seem surprised by my interest, Lady Everleigh," he observed, those perceptive eyes missing nothing. "I am accustomed to gentlemen using charity as a pretext for social calls," she admitted. "Few demonstrate genuine concern." "Perhaps I am guilty of having an ulterior motive as well," he said with unexpected candor. "I observed you at the ball last night. You appear to be the only person in the room not desperate to make an impression." Delilah felt a smile tugging at her lips. "A dubious compliment, Your Grace." "An honest observation," he countered. "After years abroad, I find English society's constant performance exhausting. You seemed authentic. Authenticity is a luxury afforded to very few women, she replied. I am fortunate that widowhood and financial independence allow me certain freedoms. Freedoms you guard jealously, from what I observed. His directness was both refreshing and unsettling. Delilah found herself responding with equal frankness. I have discovered that what most men call love is merely the desire to possess, Your Grace. I have no wish to be possessed. A reasonable position, he said, surprising her again. Though perhaps a narrow definition of love. Before she could respond to this rather presumptuous statement, Simmons appeared to announce that Lady Constance had arrived for their planned outing. I have taken enough of your time, the Duke said, rising. But I would like to contribute to your fund. And perhaps continue our conversation at a future date. The fund always welcomes contributions, Delilah said carefully. As for conversation, I find myself unusually busy this season. Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Of course. Good day, Lady Everleigh. After he departed, Constance burst into the room, eyes wide. Was that the Duke of Zephyron leaving your house? Already? Delia, what have you done? Nothing whatsoever, Delilah replied, trying to ignore the lingering warmth his presence had left. He wished to discuss charity. Charity, Constance repeated skeptically. Is that what they're calling it these days? Don't be ridiculous, Delilah said firmly, reaching for her bonnet. He is merely new to London and making the required social calls. But as they departed for their shopping expedition, Delilah found herself wondering why the Duke's visit had left her feeling so oddly unsettled. It was as though he had seen past her carefully constructed defenses with those two perceptive eyes. A dangerous quality in a man, she decided. One to be avoided at all costs. Over the following weeks, Delilah found avoiding the Duke increasingly difficult. He appeared at every social event she attended, though he never pressed his attentions upon her. Instead, he maintained a respectful distance while somehow managing to be precisely where she needed assistance, retrieving a dropped fan, procuring refreshment during a particularly tedious musicale, or rescuing her from the persistent attentions of Sir Reginald Blunt, whose hands tended to wander during country dances. Most infuriatingly, he had become involved with her charitable work, making a substantial donation to the fund and offering practical suggestions for expanding its reach. The committee members were delighted with him, particularly the elderly Lady Winchelsea, who had taken to calling him that dear boy despite his 40 years. He's not at all what I expected, Delilah admitted reluctantly to Constance as they watched him across Lady Winchelsea's drawing room, deep in conversation with a retired admiral about naval strategy. He appears genuinely interested in the work, not merely in the social connections it provides. And he's interested in you, Constance observed. Though he's been remarkably subtle about it. No flowers, no poetry, no grand declarations. Because there is no interest beyond the professional, Delilah insisted. He is new to London society and establishing himself. Nothing more. But that evening, as the gathering drew to a close, the Duke approached her with a request that challenged her certainty. Lady Everleigh, I wonder if you might permit me to call on you tomorrow, he said, his expression serious. There is a matter regarding the fund I would like to discuss privately. Propriety demanded she agree, though caution made her add, I shall be available from 2 until 3. I have other engagements thereafter. 1 hour will be sufficient, he replied with a slight bow. Until tomorrow. The following afternoon, Delilah found herself unnecessarily adjusting the arrangement of flowers in her drawing room and checking the clock with irritating frequency. When the Duke was announced precisely at 2, she was annoyed to discover her pulse had quickened. Lady Everleigh, he greeted her, his manner as composed as ever. Thank you for seeing me. You mentioned a matter regarding the fund, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Has there been some development? Yes, though perhaps not the one you're expecting. He paused, studying her with that disconcerting directness. I've been approached by several influential gentlemen who wish to contribute to the fund on the condition that they be granted positions on the governing board. Delilah stiffened. The board is currently composed entirely of women, Your Grace. That is by design. I'm aware, he replied. Which is why I did not immediately refuse them. The donations they propose would be substantial enough to establish a permanent endowment. At the cost of female governance, Delilah said sharply. The entire purpose of the fund is to demonstrate that women are capable of managing financial and social matters without male oversight. A purpose I respect, he said, surprising her. Which is why I wanted to discuss this with you privately before bringing it to the committee. I suspect these gentlemen would expect to assume control rather than serve alongside the existing board. Relief washed over her. Then you agree their proposal should be rejected? I believe the decision is yours to make, he said carefully. But I would offer an alternative. What if I were to match their proposed donations, with no conditions attached? The fund would still gain its endowment, but retain its independence. Delilah stared at him, momentarily speechless. That would be extraordinarily generous, Your Grace. But why would you make such an offer? Because I believe in the work you're doing, he said simply. And because I understand the value of independence. There was something in his tone, a quiet sincerity, that reached past her defenses. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them charged with an energy that made Delilah uncomfortably aware of him not as a duke, not as a potential suitor to be refused, but as a man whose experiences had shaped him into someone who might possibly understand her. The realization was so disquieting that she rose abruptly. This is a matter that requires careful consideration. Perhaps we should discuss it further at the committee meeting next week. He stood as well, but made no move to leave. Lady Everleigh, Delilah, there is another matter I wish to address. The use of her given name startled her. I don't recall giving you permission to address me so informally, Your Grace. You haven't, he acknowledged. But I hoped we might move beyond formality. I have come to admire you greatly these past weeks, your intelligence, your determination, your commitment to your principles. Your Grace, Zachary, he corrected gently. And before you refuse me outright, as you have so many others, I want you to know that I understand your reluctance. You value your independence, as do I. I am not proposing to take it from you. Aren't you? Delilah asked, finding her voice. What else would marriage be but the surrender of my independence? My property would become yours, my decision subject to your approval, my very identity subsumed into yours. It needn't be, he said. There are legal arrangements that can protect your property and independence. I would be willing to sign any document your solicitors devise. The offer was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she believed about men and marriage, that Delilah could only stare at him. Why would you do such a thing? Because I want a partner, not a possession, he said quietly. I've seen enough of the world to know the difference. For a dangerous moment, Delilah felt her resolve wavering. The sincerity in his eyes, the respect in his manner, it was unlike any proposal she had received before. But then memory intruded, Thomas's gentle insistence that she needn't concern herself with finances, his redirection of her interests toward suitable pursuits, his constant, smothering protection. No, she said firmly. I appreciate your honesty, but my answer must be no. I have built a life that satisfies me. I will not risk losing it, no matter how generous your terms. Something like disappointment crossed his face, but he accepted her refusal with grace. "I understand. Please know that my support for the fund remains unconditional." After he left, Delilah remained standing in her drawing room, a strange emptiness settling over her. She had refused many men without a second thought, yet this refusal left her feeling hollow rather than triumphant. It was merely surprise at his unusual approach, she told herself. Nothing more. Summer brought a succession of country house parties, which Delilah typically avoided. This year, however, she accepted an invitation to Lady Winchelsea's estate in Kent, primarily because the elderly woman had promised to introduce her to several potential donors for the fund. She had not seen the Duke since refusing his proposal 3 weeks earlier. He had sent a formal note confirming his financial commitment to the fund, but had not attended the most recent committee meeting. Delilah told herself she was relieved by his absence, though she had caught herself looking toward the door more than once. Lady Winchelsea's estate was charming if somewhat neglected, the gardens running slightly wild in a way that Delilah found refreshing after the rigid formality of most aristocratic homes. She was pleased to discover that the house party was small, just 12 guests, and focused on quiet country pursuits rather than elaborate entertainments. Her pleasure dimmed considerably when she discovered, upon entering the drawing room before dinner on the first evening, that the Duke of Zephyron was among the guests. He was engaged in conversation with their hostess, but his eyes found Delilah immediately. He offered a polite bow from across the room but made no immediate move to approach her. "You might have warned me," Delilah murmured to Lady Winchelsea when she managed to catch the older woman alone. "Warned you?" Lady Winchelsea replied with exaggerated innocence. "Whatever about, my dear?" "That the Duke would be here." "Is that a problem?" the older woman asked. "I was under the impression you worked together quite harmoniously on the committee." "We do," Delilah admitted. "It's just what, my dear?" But Delilah could hardly explain that the Duke had proposed marriage, that she had refused him, and that his presence now made her inexplicably nervous. "Nothing. It's merely unexpected." Lady Winchelsea patted her hand. "Life often is, my dear. The question is what we make of its surprises." The first 2 days of the house party passed with excruciating politeness. The Duke was unfailingly courteous, participating in group activities and conversations without seeking Delilah out or avoiding her. It was precisely the behavior she should have wanted, and precisely what made her increasingly agitated. On the third afternoon, rain cancelled the planned excursion to a local abbey. Most of the party gathered in the library for cards, but Delilah, restless and irritable, decided to explore the house instead. She found herself in a long gallery lined with family portraits, the faces of Lady Winchelsea's ancestors staring down with expressions ranging from stern to smug. At the far end, a figure stood before a window, watching the rain lash the gardens. The Duke. She considered retreating, but he turned before she could slip away. "Lady Everleigh," he said, his expression warming slightly. "Escaping the card tables." "I've never had the patience for games," she replied, then winced at how the words might be interpreted. "Nor I," he said, a hint of rueful humor in his eyes. "I prefer direct approaches, as you know." The reference to his proposal hung between them. Delilah moved to stand beside him at the window, finding it easier to speak when not looking directly at him. "I hope my refusal hasn't caused you to withdraw from the fund's work," she said. "Your absence was noted at the last meeting." "I had business in Derbyshire," he replied. "Unrelated to any personal matters. I remain committed to the fund." "I'm glad," she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it sincerely. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the rain transform the garden into a misty wonderland. The silence should have been uncomfortable, but instead, it felt oddly companionable. "May I ask you a personal question, Lady Everleigh?" he said finally. She tensed, but nodded. "You may ask." "I may not answer." "Fair enough," he acknowledged with a slight smile. "I wonder, were you happy in your marriage?" The directness of the question startled her. "That is certainly personal." "Too personal." She considered deflecting, but something about the moment, the rain-softened light, the distance from London society, the quiet between them, encouraged honesty. "I was content," she said carefully. "Thomas was kind. He provided well for me. He never raised his voice or his hand." "But," the Duke prompted gently. "But kindness can be its own form of control," she admitted. "He decided how I should spend my time, which friends were suitable, which books were appropriate for a lady's mind. Always with my best interests at heart, of course." "Of course," the Duke said dryly. "Men are remarkably adept at knowing what's best for others." The subtle self-mockery in his tone made her smile despite herself. "Are you an exception, Your Grace?" "Hardly," he replied. "I've made my share of presumptions. But I've had the advantage of being proven wrong often enough to recognize my fallibility." "A rare quality in a duke," she observed. "A necessary quality in a human being," he countered. Again, that unexpected silence fell between them, not awkward, but charged with something Delilah was reluctant to name. "When I returned from the peninsula," he said after a moment, "I discovered my fiancée had married my cousin in my absence. She said she couldn't bear the uncertainty of waiting for a man who might never return." "I'm sorry," Delilah said, surprised by his candor. "Don't be," he replied. "It was for the best." She wanted security above all else, a perfectly reasonable desire. "I couldn't offer that certainty then." "And now?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Now I understand that certainty is an illusion. Life offers no guarantees. We can only choose who we wish to face its uncertainties with." The intensity of his gaze made her pulse quicken. Delilah looked away, back to the rain-drenched garden. "A philosophical perspective." "A practical one," he corrected. "Particularly when one has seen how quickly life can change, or end." Before she could respond, voices from the corridor announced the approach of other guests. The moment of intimacy dissolved, and Delilah stepped back, nodding politely to the Duke before greeting the newcomers. But as the afternoon wore on, she found herself replaying their conversation. There had been no attempt to persuade her, no challenge to her decision. Just honesty offered and received. It was disarming and dangerous precisely because of that. The final evening of the house party featured a small musical entertainment followed by dancing. Delilah wore a gown of deep plum silk that she knew suited her well, though she told herself firmly that her choice had nothing to do with the Duke's presence. She had managed to avoid being alone with him since their conversation in the gallery, joining group activities and ensuring there were always others present. He had respected her unspoken boundary, never seeking her out directly, though she often felt his gaze upon her when he thought she wasn't looking. Now, as a young lady performed a rather indifferent rendition of a Mozart sonata, Delilah found herself seated beside Lady Winchelsea on a small sofa. The Duke sat across the room, apparently absorbed in the music despite its questionable quality. "He watches you, you know," Lady Winchelsea murmured, her aged voice barely audible above the piano. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Delilah replied, keeping her eyes fixed on the performer. "Don't play the simpleton, child. It doesn't suit you," the older woman chided gently. "The Duke is a good man, one of the few who deserves the title. I never suggested otherwise." No, but you keep him at arm's length as though he represented some personal danger to you. Delilah turned to Lady Winchelsea, startled by her perception. I hardly know him. Perhaps, the older woman conceded. But I suspect you recognize something in him that frightens you more than any rake or fortune hunter ever could. And what might that be? Delilah asked, unable to keep a defensive note from her voice. Lady Winchelsea patted her hand. The possibility that independence need not mean solitude, my dear. Before Delilah could formulate a response, the music ended and applause filled the room. The guests rose, and servants began clearing space for dancing. Disturbed by Lady Winchelsea's observation, Delilah slipped away to the terrace, needing a moment alone to collect her thoughts. The night was clear after the day's rain, stars glittering above and the scent of wet earth and roses filling the air. She had not been outside long when she heard footsteps behind her. Without turning, she knew it was the Duke. I apologize for disturbing your solitude, he said, keeping a respectful distance. I can leave if you prefer. No, she found herself saying. You may stay. He moved to stand beside her at the balustrade, both of them looking out over the darkened garden. The night air is pleasant after the rain, he observed. Yes, she agreed, grateful for the neutral topic. I've always loved the scent after a summer storm. As have I, he said. It reminds me of new beginnings. The comment hung in the air between them, weighted with significance Delilah wasn't ready to acknowledge. She searched for a safe response and found none. After a moment, the Duke spoke again, his tone careful. Lady Everleigh, Delilah, I want to apologize if my presence here has caused you discomfort. I did not know you would be among the guests when I accepted Lady Winchelsea's invitation. There's no need for apology, she replied. We are both adults capable of maintaining civil relations. Civil, he repeated. Is that all we are capable of, do you think? The question pierced through her carefully maintained defenses. Delilah turned to face him directly. What more would you have us be, Your Grace? Zachary, he corrected gently. And I would have us be honest, at least. Very well, she said, lifting her chin. Honestly, then. You unsettle me. Your directness, your perceptiveness, they make it difficult to maintain the distance I prefer. He nodded, accepting her words without offense. And honestly, I find your independence and clarity of purpose more compelling than any conventional charm. I respect your refusal, but I cannot regret having asked. Even knowing my answer would be no. Even then, he confirmed. Some questions must be asked regardless of the answer. Music drifted out from the house, a waltz beginning. The Duke, Zachary, offered his hand. Would you dance with me? Just once, before we return to London and resume our proper distances. She should refuse. It would be safer, more consistent with the boundaries she had established. But something about the night, about the honesty between them, made her place her hand in his. Just once, she agreed. They did not return inside but danced there on the terrace, moving together in perfect rhythm to the muffled music. His hand was warm against her back, his steps sure and graceful. Delilah found herself relaxing into the dance, into the moment, in a way she had not allowed herself to do in years. You dance well, she said, surprised to find herself slightly breathless. As do you, he replied. We move well together. The comment might have been innocent, but the look in his eyes was not. Delilah felt a warmth rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with exertion. As the music drew to a close, he slowed their steps but did not immediately release her. Delilah, he said softly, I will not press you where you do not wish to go. But know this, my regard for you is unchanged. If you should ever reconsider, I will wait. For how long? She asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. His smile was gentle, his eyes serious. Forever, if necessary. The word hung in the night air between them, impossibly romantic, impossibly sincere. Delilah stepped back, breaking their connection. Forever is a very long time, Your Grace, she said, falling back on formality as a shield. Yes, he agreed. But some things are worth waiting for. He bowed and offered his arm to escort her inside. Delilah took it, her mind whirling with confusion. She had built her life around certainty, around control, yet here was a man offering something entirely different. Not dominance or submission, but partnership. Not possession, but possibility. It was terrifying. And exhilarating. Autumn in London brought a renewed social season and a flurry of activity for the fund. Delilah threw herself into the work with even greater determination than usual, as if business could crowd out the unsettling thoughts that had followed her from Kent. She had seen the Duke, Zachary, at several events, but always maintained a careful public cordiality. He had respected her unspoken boundaries, never seeking private conversation, though she sometimes caught an expression in his eyes that suggested patience rather than resignation. "You're avoiding him," Constance observed one afternoon as they sorted donated clothing for the fund's winter distribution. "I'm not avoiding anyone," Delilah replied, folding a woolen shawl with unnecessary precision. "I'm simply busy." "So busy you practically fled Lady Carlton's music-hall when he entered? So busy you changed your regular shopping day when you learned he walks in the park on Tuesday mornings?" "You're being ridiculous," Delilah said, though the accuracy of her friend's observations made her cheeks warm. Constance set aside the coat she was examining and faced Delilah directly. "What are you afraid of, Delia? That he'll press his suit against your wishes? He's been nothing but respectful of your decision." "I'm not afraid," Delilah insisted, though the knot in her stomach suggested otherwise. "Then you're a fool," Constance said bluntly. "You've spent 8 years guarding your independence as though it were a precious jewel that someone might steal. But independence isn't meant to be a prison, Delia. It's meant to give you the freedom to choose." "I have chosen," Delilah said firmly. "I choose my work, my friends, my life as it is." "No," Constance replied, her voice gentler now. "You've chosen safety. There's a difference." The words stung with their accuracy. Delilah turned away, unable to meet her friend's knowing gaze. "He's different, Delia," Constance continued. "Anyone with eyes can see it. The way he listens when you speak. The way he considers your views with genuine interest. The way he looks at you are not as property to be acquired, but as a person to be treasured. Thomas looked at me that way once, too," Delilah said quietly. "Before we married." "The Duke is not Thomas," Constance said firmly. "And you are not the girl you were then. You're a woman who knows her own mind and has proven her own capabilities. Do you really think any man could control you now unless you allowed it?" The question lingered in Delilah's mind long after their conversation ended. Had she been guarding against a danger that no longer existed? Had her fear of losing independence become an excuse to avoid vulnerability? These unsettling thoughts accompanied her to the fund's autumn gala the following evening. The event was being held at the Clarendon Hotel, and Delilah had spent weeks ensuring every detail was perfect. The success of the evening would determine the fund's resources for the coming year. She arrived early, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that highlighted her auburn hair and fair complexion. The ballroom was transformed with autumn flowers and candlelight, the effect both elegant and welcoming. "It looks magnificent," came a familiar voice behind her. "You've outdone yourself." She turned to find Zachary, the Duke, regarding her with warm appreciation. He was impeccably dressed in evening attire, the stark black and white emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you," she said, pleased despite herself. "The committee has worked very hard. Under your guidance," he noted. "Your vision has made this possible." "Our vision," she corrected, surprising herself with the inclusiveness of the word. "Your contributions have been invaluable." Something shifted in his expression, a cautious hope, quickly contained. "I'm glad to have been of service," he said formally. "I should greet Lady Winchelsea. She appears to be signaling for my attention." As he moved away, Delilah found herself watching him, noting the respect with which he greeted the elderly lady, the genuine warmth in his smile as he bent to hear her words. There was nothing calculating in his manner, nothing false. The evening progressed smoothly. Donations exceeded expectations, speeches were mercifully brief, and the assembled guests appeared genuinely engaged with the fund's mission. Delilah moved through the crowd, thanking supporters and explaining the fund's work to potential new donors. It was nearly midnight when she found herself momentarily alone, taking a brief respite in a small antechamber adjacent to the ballroom. She had just closed her eyes for a moment of quiet when the door opened. Zachary stood in the doorway, hesitating when he saw her. "I apologize for disturbing you. I was looking for a moment of peace myself." "There's room enough for two seeking quiet," she found herself saying, gesturing to the small sofa opposite her chair. He entered, closing the door behind him, and sat where indicated. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. "The gala has been a tremendous success," he said finally. "You should be proud." "I am," she admitted. "Though I find myself wondering what comes next." "For the fund." "For everything," she said, surprising herself with her candor. "I've spent 8 years defining myself by what I wouldn't have a husband, a conventional life. I'm beginning to wonder if refusing is enough of a purpose." His expression grew thoughtful. "What would you have if you could choose freely? Without fear of judgment or constraint?" It was a question she had never fully allowed herself to consider. "I would continue my work," she said slowly. "Not just with the fund, but managing my estates, making them more productive, improving conditions for the tenants." "And personally," he prompted gently. Delilah met his gaze directly. "I would have companionship without submission. Respect without condescension. Love without possession." "Are those things truly so impossible to find?" he asked. "In my experience, yes," she replied. "Men say they admire an independent woman, but what they mean is they find her novelty amusing until it inconveniences them." "Some men, perhaps," he acknowledged. "Not all." The implication hung in the air between them. Delilah found her heart beating faster, her carefully constructed certainties beginning to crumble. "You asked how long I would wait," Zachary said quietly. "I meant what I said. Forever, if necessary. Because what I want isn't to possess you or control you, Delilah. I want to walk beside you, to face life's uncertainties together, to build something meaningful with someone who challenges and inspires me." He rose, moving to kneel beside her chair, though he did not touch her. "I don't ask you to surrender your independence. I ask only that you consider whether independence must mean solitude. Whether strength must mean standing alone." The words echoed Lady Winchelsea's observation so closely that Delilah caught her breath. "You make it sound so simple." "Not simple," he corrected. "Worthwhile." In his eyes, she saw not conquest but hope. Not ownership but partnership. And something else, a vulnerability that matched her own. "I'm afraid," she admitted softly. Of what? Of making a mistake. Of losing myself. Of discovering that all men truly are the same, despite appearances. He nodded, accepting her fears without dismissing them. Those are reasonable concerns. I cannot promise you certainty, Delilah. I can only promise honesty, respect, and the freedom to choose your path, with or without me beside you. A knock at the door interrupted them. Zachary rose quickly as a servant entered to inform Delilah that her carriage was ready. "Thank you," she said, gathering her composure. "I'll be out directly." When the servant withdrew, she turned to Zachary. "I need time," she said. "To think. To be certain." "Take all the time you need," he replied. "I meant what I said. I will wait." Winter descended on London with unusual severity. Snow blanketed the streets, and bitter winds howled around the eaves of Delilah's townhouse. She had withdrawn somewhat from society, pleading the weather and the press of business matters. In truth, she was contemplating a decision that would shape the rest of her life. Zachary had kept his word, maintaining a respectful distance while making it clear that his feelings remained unchanged. They encountered each other at committee meetings and the occasional social event, where he was unfailingly courteous but never presumptuous. His restraint only increased Delilah's growing certainty that he was, indeed, different from other men she had known. One bitter December afternoon, as snow fell in thick curtains past her windows, Delilah sat in her study reviewing correspondence. Among the letters was one from her land steward in Derbyshire, reporting that severe weather had damaged tenant cottages on the north side of the estate. "Immediate repairs are necessary," he wrote, "though the expense will be considerable. I await your instructions." Delilah did not hesitate. "Proceed with all necessary repairs immediately," she wrote in reply. "Ensure the families have adequate temporary accommodations and provisions. Spare no reasonable expense for their comfort and safety." As she sealed the letter, she realized how automatic her decision had been. 8 years ago, she would have hesitated, sought advice, worried about the propriety of her choices. Now she acted with confidence in her judgment. She was not the same woman who had been widowed at 24. She was stronger, more certain of her capabilities, more clear in her purpose. Would marriage, even to a man like Zachary, threaten that hard-won confidence? Or might it, as he suggested, offer the opportunity to build something greater than either of them could achieve alone? The question circled in her mind as December deepened toward Christmas. Delilah declined most seasonal invitations, preferring the quiet of her home to the relentless gaiety of holiday balls and dinner parties. On Christmas Eve, however, she accepted Lady Winchelsea's invitation to a small gathering for those seeking peace rather than revelry. The elderly woman's home was warm and welcoming, decorated simply with evergreens and candles, the atmosphere one of genuine friendship rather than social display. Delilah was not entirely surprised to find Zachary among the dozen guests. He greeted her with a bow and a smile that warmed his eyes but made no attempt to monopolize her attention, joining instead in the general conversation around the fire. As the evening progressed, Delilah found herself observing him with new clarity. The way he listened attentively to old Admiral Barton's reminiscences without impatience. The gentle courtesy he showed to Lady Winchelsea's companion, a shy woman often overlooked in company. The intelligence with which he discussed agricultural improvements with Sir Henry Graves, revealing a deep understanding of land management that matched her own. When Lady Winchelsea suggested carol singing, Zachary joined willingly, his rich baritone blending harmoniously with the other voices. Watching him, Delilah felt something settle within her, a certainty that had been building slowly over weeks of careful thought. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Delilah found herself alone with Zachary in Lady Winchelsea's small library, both of them having sought a moment of quiet before venturing into the snowy night. I didn't expect to see you this evening, she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Lady Winchelsea is hard to refuse, he replied with a slight smile. And I find I prefer her quiet gatherings to more elaborate entertainments. As do I, Delilah agreed. Though I've been avoiding most social events lately. I had noticed, he said. I hope it's not on my account. Not entirely, she admitted. I've been thinking. A dangerous pastime, he observed, humor warming his eyes. Indeed, she agreed. Particularly when one's thoughts keep returning to the same subject. And what subject might that be, he asked, his tone carefully neutral though she could see the hope kindling in his expression. Delilah took a deep breath. Independence, she said. And what it truly means. A worthy subject, he replied. Have you reached any conclusions? Several, she said, summoning her courage. I've realized that true independence isn't about standing alone. It's about having the freedom to choose one's connections, one's commitments, one's companions. His expression grew more intent, though he remained silent, allowing her to continue. I've also realized, she went on, that I've been confusing independence with isolation. That in protecting myself from potential harm, I've also denied myself potential joy. Delilah, he said softly, her name almost a question. She met his gaze directly. You asked me once what I would have, if I could choose freely. I told you companionship without submission, respect without condescension, love without possession. I remember, he said. I believe those things are possible, she said. With you. The words hung in the air between them, a declaration and an invitation. Zachary moved closer, though still he did not touch her. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I would not have you come to me with doubts. I am certain, she replied. Not because I have no fears, but because I believe what we might build together is worth facing those fears. He took her hands then, his touch warm and steady. I have loved you, he said simply, since I first saw you refuse Lord Pembroke with such perfect politeness and hidden amusement. I love your mind, your determination, your principles. I love the woman you have made yourself into, and I would never ask you to be less than you are. And I, Delilah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, have come to love your patience, your perception, your respect for my choices, even when they kept us apart. His smile was brilliant in its joy. May I hope, then, that you might consider a different choice now? Yes, she said, squeezing his hands. Though I have conditions. His expression grew serious. Name them. My property remains legally mine, she said firmly. I continue my work with the fund. And decisions that affect us both are made together, as equals. Agreed, he said without hesitation. I would add only one condition of my own. Which is? That you call me Zachary, never Your Grace, especially when you're angry with me, which I assume will happen with some regularity, given our equally strong opinions. Delilah laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. Agreed, Zachary. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. Lady Delilah Everleigh, he said formally, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? Not to complete me, for I am whole, as are you, but to create something greater than either of us might build alone. Yes, she said simply. I will. As snowflakes danced past the windows and firelight cast golden shadows across the room, Zachary drew her gently into his arms. His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of shared pleasure and mutual respect that made her heart soar with newfound certainty. When they parted, his eyes shone with emotion. I told you I would wait forever, he murmured. I'm rather glad forever came sooner than expected. Forever, Delilah replied, resting her hand against his cheek, is just beginning.